Hey there, and welcome to the next video in the Intro to Web Dev series. So far you've learned kind of the fundamentals of web dev, you've learned HTML and CSS, and then you learned the fundamentals of JavaScript. And you've done, quite a few things at this point. You've used like functions, and you've defined like interactive HTML, you got into if statements, and then for loops and arrays. And so this video kind of builds on all of that to introduce a new concept called objects. And we'll get into it in this video, but objects are kind of yet another way to organize data. And it's kind of a new way of thinking about code, which I'll try to remember to circle back to at the end of this video. Okay, anyway, let me dive in. I think for this video, I'm going to use Replit, so don't let this catch you off guard. This is just another editor. If you've been using your own editor or Atom, that's all good. You can do the exact same types of things, but I'm going to use Replit just because at the beginning of this series, I said you could use Replit, and then I kind of never used it again. So I'm just kind of going back to it and using it just to show an example of what it looks like to work in this environment. But this is just an index.html file with a script tag that points to a script.js file, and then a web page over here. It just kind of puts it all in one screen, so it's a little easier to work with. So yeah, if you've been working with your own editor, maybe Replit is also worth checking out. But I'm just going to use it as my environment to sort of talk through some of this stuff today. Okay, so far, let's do some review maybe. Let's start with talking about the kinds of variables and values that you've seen. So you've seen what are called primitives, and by that we mean like a single value. So for example, I can say let message equals hello world, and this hello world value is a string, and it's a primitive, which means that there's no other like associated data with this value. You have hello world, and that's it. There's nothing else. You could have like other message, but even this would be another primitive because there's no other data associated with these messages. So like hello world, it's just a message, and you don't have anything else along with it. So you don't have like, I don't know, a color or a number. So it's a primitive. So we can use that in the ways that we've already seen. So I'm going to say like document.write message, and I'm going to hope that I'm remembering the syntax for that. I'm going to run, which is the exact same thing as kind of saving it to your file and refreshing if you need Replit, and here we have hello world. In order to talk about primitives, maybe I'm going to change this from like a generic message. Maybe I'll talk about people instead. So maybe I'll say like let name equals Ada. Ada was the first computer scientist or first programmer, so I like to use her as one of my examples, but whatever. So I can say like hello plus name, and I can run this, and I get hello Ada. And here, like, we don't have any other associated data with Ada. We don't know Ada's last name. We don't know how old she is, or anything like that. So this is a single primitive value. And now even if I do like let first name and let last name, her last name was Lovelace, Ada Lovelace. These are still primitives because these are not like grouped together. These happen to be on like one line after another. They happen to be close to each other in the code, but there's nothing intrinsically tying them together. They are kind of separate concepts or separate variables. So anyway, I think I'm talking too much about like the definition of primitive, and that's probably too confusing. So maybe just don't worry about that for now. But this is just kind of a review of what you've seen before. You've seen how to use variables and how to store values in those variables, and then how to sort of pass those variables in as parameters. So let's say something like maybe I have a year, birth year, and I never remember anything that I look up. So let me look her up. She was born 1815. Okay. So I can have like a number, and this is another primitive, but it doesn't matter. And maybe I'll say like first name plus was born in plus birth year. Maybe I'll give that a little bit more room. Okay, and I'll run this. And I see Ada was born in 1815. Okay, and again, these are just using variables that point to values and then passing them in as parameters. So this works. This is all good. But now let's say that I wanted to add other people. I wanted to maybe say, in addition to Ada Lovelace, maybe I want to talk about Grace Hopper. She's another like pioneer of computer science. What would I do? And there's a few options, but maybe what I could do is say like first name 1, birth year 1, then have like let first name 2 equals Grace, and then let birth year 2 equals whenever Grace Hopper was born, 1906. And I could use them here, you know, I could kind of refactor this to reference the new variables. Maybe I'll have some white space to make it a little easier to read, but you know, this will work. And if I have 2 here and 2 here, you know, hopefully it works, and I can run this. And okay, it's on the same line. It's easy enough to fix. Document.write, and then maybe a new line. Okay, so now I have 2 people. Now let's say I wanted to add a third, and you know, I could also add 2 more variables and keep going. But you know, maybe what I want to do is use arrays instead. So how would I do that with the fact that I have like 2 different variables representing like one person? And you know, one way to do that using the concepts we've seen so far is to have one array for names, so like first names, and then set that to an array. And then that array contains the 2 names that I have so far, and then maybe another array for birth years and 1815, 1906. And then instead of writing it manually, maybe what I could do is have a for loop. So like for let I equals 0, I is less than first names dot length, I plus plus, and in curly braces put my code. And then maybe what I could do is first name I, and then birth years I, and this works, I think, hopefully, assuming I don't have any syntax errors. I do first name is not defined. Okay, that's because I called this first names. So I promised that I would kind of model the idea of debugging and stuff, and there was maybe an example. So I read this error message down here, which I realize is now like behind my face probably. Let me move that up a little bit. Yeah, so I read this error, first name is not defined, and then I looked at where that variable is being used, and then I realized, oh wait, that makes sense because that's not what I called my array. Okay, so let's run that again. Okay, and now this works. And it's fine. This approach of having 2 different arrays, but it's just a little bit annoying to deal with. It's a concept or an approach called parallel arrays, and that means that you have a bunch of different arrays that contain related data, and you have to kind of manually sync it up. So by that I mean I had to basically know ahead of time that first names I and birth years I are talking about the same person. So Ada is at index 0 and her birth year is also at index 0. Grace is at index 1 and her birth year is also at index 1 in a different array. And so, you know, we could keep going with this approach. And so like, let's say I wanted last names in here as well. And what I would have to do is create another array and set it equal to the last names of the people. And it would just kind of get unwieldy and annoying to deal with. And so parallel arrays is generally considered a bad idea. So I would try not to use them in your code. Which brings us to, if we're not supposed to use parallel arrays, then what are we supposed to use? And the answer, maybe not surprisingly, is a concept called objects. So I think I might start over with empty code. To create an object, it's new syntax. And so what I'm going to do is create a variable. I'm going to call it person for now. And I'm going to set it equal to an object. And to create an object, here comes the new syntax. You want an opening curly brace and then a closing curly brace. And I'm going to do that ahead of time just so I know that I have both my opening brace and my closing brace. Otherwise, I'll forget. And then inside of the curly braces, you want like property name value pairs. And by that, I mean, I want to give this person a first name and I want to set it equal. So I'm going to say colon, not an equal sign, a colon, to Ada here. And then other properties can follow the same format, but separate them with a comma. So I'm going to put comma here, and I'm going to say birth year 1815. Okay, so I have created an object, and this object contains two properties, first name and birth year. First name is set to the value Ada, which is a string, and birth year is set to the value 1815, which is a number. So I've created that object and I've pointed the person variable at that object. This is similar to any other variable, but it's pointing to an object instead of a primitive. And the way I think about it is this is an object and not a primitive because it has like several associated fields that are grouped together. So we know not only is the first name of this particular object Ada, but there's an associated birth year with this particular object. So we know that Ada goes with this birth year, but just by looking at the code. So that's kind of how I think about the difference between primitives and objects. Anyway, now that we have the object in our variable, we can use that by, maybe I'll create another variable and I'll set it equal to person dot first name, and then I'll maybe have a plus sign, was born on, plus person dot birth year. And I want to put some new lines in here just to clean it up a little bit. Good enough. What's this button do? Yeah, good enough. So like, don't pay too close attention to like the new lines because they just make your code a little easier to read. But notice the way that I use the object is I take the variable name and then the dot operator and then a field name. And this is very similar to how you would reference any other variable. It just so happens that this first name is sort of inside of this person object. And very similar for person.birth year. I am taking the person variable here and saying with the dot operator, give me the birth year of that particular person object. And then I'm throwing all that into a message variable just to make it a little easier to read. So now I'm going to say document.write message, and what I should see is, yeah, Ada was born on 1815. And this is using the person object. Now, of course, you're not limited to a single object. This is kind of where it starts getting interesting. So maybe I'll rename this person to Ada. I'll rename it here and here. I think that's everywhere. Let's run and find out. Yep, okay. So maybe I'll have another one and I'll call this one Grace equals, and I'm going to do the exact same thing where I have curly brace, and I have a tendency to like write my curly braces or my square brackets or really anything, parentheses, like first. So I do the first one and then the closing one, and then I write what's going to go inside of it. So in this case, it's going to be first name colon Grace and birth year colon, what was it, 1906? 1906, yeah. Okay, I'm going to save that. I haven't used it yet, but I'm going to run it just to test it out. Okay, nothing has broken horribly, so my syntax is right here. And, you know, I could do the same basic thing. I could use that new object. So maybe instead of putting it in a separate message variable, maybe just for the sake of time, I'll do this manually. I'll say Grace dot first name plus was born on, or should I say in? Yeah, I guess I should say in, right? I don't know. Grace dot birth year. Add some spaces, maybe some white space. Good enough. Okay, so now I'm going to run this and see what happens. And right, of course, yeah, okay, whatever. My exact, like, the output doesn't really matter to me, but I guess I'll put it in a new line just to make it a little easier to read. And okay, we have Ada was born in 1815, Grace was born in 1906. And, you know, you could have done this with without objects, with just using a bunch of different variables, maybe like Ada first name, Ada birth year, but this gets a lot less manageable if you have, you know, maybe you have 100 people and you don't want to have to maintain 400 different variables just for, you know, basically the same data over and over again. So with that in mind, let's say I wanted to add another person. I wanted to add Alan Turing to our list of sort of the pioneers of computer science. And so let me start out by refactoring this a little bit. Maybe instead of having Ada and Grace be separate variables, maybe I'll just have a people array. And maybe I'll just move some of this stuff down to give myself some room. So let people equals, and I'm going to make people an array. And kind of what I was saying earlier, I like to just start by having both my opening and closing symbol. In this case, I'm making an array, so it's a square bracket. And now I know that my elements are going to go in here, or the values in the array are going to go here. So the values that I want in my array are going to be my objects. So previously I was storing them in variables. Now I'm going to store them as the elements in the array. So I'm going to paste that in here, and I'm going to put a comma to like comma separate the different elements in the array. I'm going to move this up into there as well. JavaScript doesn't really care about white space, so I'm going to maybe have a new line here. Actually, maybe I'll have another new line here. And what's this look like? No. But the idea, no matter whether you have white space or not, is that this people variable points to an array, and that array contains 2 elements, and each of those elements is an object. The first object being this first line here that represents Ada Lovelace, and the second element, or the second object, being this one. So now I have my array, and now what I can do is write a for loop that loops over that array and does something with each object. So I'm going to say for, and there's a few ways I can do this. I could do like I equals 0, blah, 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 and then get each object at an index, but I think we're going to do it the easier way for right now. And say like let person of people. This is the sort of like for of loop that we talked about in a previous week. Last week? No, 2 weeks ago. Whatever. But this is just a for loop that iterates over each element in the array. And now that I have that, I can do, let me copy some of this stuff. I can make my message equal person.firstname was born in person.birthyear. Clean this up a little bit, and then I can move this code as well. Okay, and then I don't need this stuff down here. So, assuming that I got all my syntax right, what I'm expecting to happen, if I sort of read through this code line by line, I create a people array where the array contains 2 objects, which are representing people. Then I have a for loop that iterates over each person in the array, and then for each person, I create a message, and then I print that message out, followed by a new line. So let's run that and see what happens. And there we go. And this approach of using an array of objects is the alternative, the better alternative to using parallel arrays. So now if I wanted to add a person, it's a lot easier, and I can say first name Alan for Alan Turing, and when was he born? 1912, I want to say. 1912. Birth year 1912. Okay, and notice that the only thing I changed about my code was this line. I added a single object to my array, and I don't need to touch the for loop. And now if I run this, it works. And that's kind of the payoff. Because I wrote code that handles a person, when there are certain assumptions that a person has a first name and a birth year, but as long as those assumptions remain true for the data that I put into the array, I can just keep filling this array up with more people, and this code will just work. The rest of this code will magically work because we are using sort of the power of objects and of arrays. Okay, so that's kind of the fundamentals of objects. That might be about as far as I go with objects themselves. So here's the syntax. You use curly braces to kind of group fields and values together. You want a colon here and a comma here. So like let's maybe have an example of what happens if you do, I don't know, equals here. This is going to be a common thing that I think, if you're new to objects, you'll do this. In fact, if you're not new to objects, you'll often still do this. So like I do this all the time. I forget the syntax for it, and I use an equal sign instead of a colon. So let's run that, and you'll get, this error here, syntax error, invalid shorthand property initializer, which is a goofy sounding error message, but it says, all right, line 3, and then you can kind of squint here and remember to yourself, like, oh, right, if it's inside of an object and it's a property, then it's a colon instead of an equal sign. So okay, so that's a common error. The other common bug that you'll have is semicolon instead of a comma. That's another common one. I do that all the time. If I run that, then syntax error, unexpected token, semicolon on line 3 here. So that means that I saw the semicolon, but wait, a semicolon shouldn't be inside of an object, so I'm confused. JavaScript isn't smart enough to just treat it as a comma, so it yells at you. So just make sure it's a comma. I don't know, let's see what happens if I don't have anything there. So yeah, another kind of error message, unexpected identifier. I think that's complaining about birth year. Actually, it's saying that I read this line of code, but then I got to birth year, and it's like I didn't understand that because I thought there should be a comma here. And maybe JavaScript should be smart enough to handle all those cases, but it's not. So those are some of the errors that you are very likely to get when you are dealing with objects. I don't know. Another one's probably you'll forget a closing curly brace. Let's see what that looks like. And that just broke my entire code. No, there it goes. So unexpected token. So it gets here actually, and it's just kind of confused, and that means that your error is around here. So I don't know, you'll get a bunch of these kinds of errors, but they're totally normal. But they all kind of go back to the same idea of make sure that your syntax is right for objects, which is curly brackets and then colons and commas. Okay, so that's objects in a nutshell. I think maybe the next thing I'll talk about is like taking it to the next level. So this example is, I hate the word simple, but it's relatively small, and I've kind of narrowed it down to only 2 properties for each object. But objects can be much more complicated than this. And so to demonstrate that, maybe one thing I'll do is, instead of having birth year, maybe I want a year, a month, and a date. And the way I want to do that is by actually having a birthday object. And remember that you can use objects pretty much anywhere that you can use a regular value or variable. including inside of objects, which might sound a little weird, but what that means is that each of my objects can contain other objects. So let me kind of demonstrate what that would look like. So the new lines here are going to get a little wonky, but let's say that I want to have a birthday, I guess I'll say, birthday field inside of each object, and I'm going to set that birthday field equal to an object. So I'm going to have an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. And then inside of those curly braces, I'm going to have 3 fields. I'm going to say year, and I already forgot what it is, 1815 or so. What is it? 1815, yeah. And maybe a month, and I think that's December, November, wait, December 10, and a day of 10. And when you're dealing with objects in this kind of notation, it gets messy with new lines and stuff. So I kind of like breaking it up into each individual line. So maybe that's okay. Maybe I would go even one level further and do something like this, where now this is one object, where this object contains 2 fields. The first field is first name, which is set to a string, and the second field that this object contains is birthday, and birthday itself is an object that contains 3 fields. So let me just do the same thing for the other people in the array. So let me take Grace Hopper here and give her a birthday. Am I spelling that right? We'll find out. Colon, and then a new object, which I'll indicate by using curly braces, opening and closing. And then 3 fields, year, 1906, I think. Month was that, I don't remember. December 9. Wait, are they one day off? Is that true? December 10? December 9? Oh, I don't know if I realized that. That's cool. And day, December 9. December, and then day is 9. And let me follow the same kind of formatting just to make it a little easier for myself to read. And there you go. And like, I don't know, maybe I'll point this out. Like, notice how there's like 2 closing curly braces. This is because there's two levels of objects here. One is the birthday, and then the other one is the object for the person itself. So you might introduce another new line here. Actually, maybe that would make it even easier to read, so that you can more easily match them up. It's kind of personal preference, but I like to be as readable as I can. Anyway, let's give Alan a birthday, and let's do curly braces, and then year of 1912, month of June 23. And then day of 23, and I'm fairly confident that I probably broke some of the syntax, but we'll find out in a second. Okay, I'm going to add some new lines, Okay, so now I've changed my person objects to no longer have a birth year. Now they have a birthday, and birthday is itself an object. So a few ways forward, but I think what I'm going to do is just keep it all in one kind of message variable. Was born on, and instead of dot birth year, what I'm going to say is person, which is going to be each individual element in this array. So this is one person, this is one person, and this is one person. So for each of those people, I guess, persons, for each of those people, I can say person dot birthday dot month. So I'm getting the reference to person, which is the object as a whole. Then I'm going basically inside of that object, and I'm saying give me the birthday of that person. And now that I have that birthday, give me the month that's inside that birthday. So it's kind of nesting the object organization of the data. So I'm going to finish this out real quick and say so it's month, comma, wait, no, not comma, person dot, no, space, right, space, plus person dot birthday dot day, I think, plus, now I want a comma, plus person dot birthday dot year. We'll see if that's right. Actually, we'll see that right now. So we run this and see what happens. And okay, that actually worked. So here we see printed out, Ada was born on December 10th, 1815. Grace was born on December 9th, 1906. Alan was born on June 23, 1912. And again, sort of the power of objects is that each of these objects contains the same like format of data, and that format can be other objects. I don't know how much further I should get into that, because you'll kind of see it kind of naturally as you look at other code. But I do want to maybe just show you one more example of that, and that is so we've seen objects, and we've seen objects containing objects, and we've seen an array. In this case, we have a people array that contains objects. You can mix and match all of this stuff. So objects can also contain arrays. So let me try to do this kind of quickly. I'll add a field called known for, and I want to set that equal to a property, and that the value of that property is going to be an array. And Ada Lovelace was known for inventing programming, pretty much, and also poetry, believe it or not. Interesting mix. So now this object contains 3 fields. The first name field has a value of Ada, the birthday field has a value of this object, and the known for field is a value of this array. Okay, so I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to, maybe I should also call out the fact that before I added that known for, I added a comma. So I'm going to have a comma after birthday because I'm adding a field, and then I'm going to add known for, set that equal to an array. Whoops, see, I just did it because I said the word equal. So known for, and it's a property. So I don't want to use the equal sign. I want to use the colon symbol to set it to a property, and that property is going to be an array. And Grace was known for many things, but she was known for like basically inventing debugging and nanoseconds. Actually, there's like a funny story about that, but I won't ramble too much more about it. I definitely recommend looking these people up if you're curious, though. And then I'll finish out by giving Alan his known for array, and he was known for, I don't know, AI and algorithms. It's a hard word to spell. Okay, so now each of my person objects has an array field, or a known for field that points to an array. And each of those arrays contains 2 objects or two elements, but that part doesn't actually matter. So anyway, now that I'm down here in my for loop, which is iterating over the people array, I can get a reference to each person, each object in that array, and then I can get a reference to each known for array for each person. And that's maybe a little bit confusing. But what that will look like is another for loop. So maybe I'll say for let topic of person dot known for. So I'm taking the person variable, which I got from the array, and I'm using the dot operator to get its known for field, which is itself an array. So I can iterate over it in a for loop. So this for loop itself is also nested. And maybe I'll do like document.write, and without thinking too hard about it, maybe I'll just put it in an li or something. So maybe I'll write an li. And I will just print topic in that li. Okay. let's see what breaks. Okay, the syntax or the styling could maybe use some extra attention, but the content is there. So I now have in my page, Ada was born on December 10th, 1815, and here are a list of things that she was known for. I could add more content, but that's not really the point of what I'm trying to talk about. The point of what I'm trying to talk about is that all of this stuff came from this structure, this object structure, where her name was in the first name field, her birthday was stored in the birthday field, and itself was an object. And then these topics that she was known for were stored in an array inside of that object. So it's this idea of like nesting data, and objects can contain arrays can contain objects, and any combination, and it can get like quite nesty if you're working with more complicated data. Okay, I think that's about as far as I'm going to go with objects, now that you've seen kind of a more, I don't love the word advanced, but like a more involved example that has kind of this nested data. And so the last thing I want to talk about is, maybe kind of the why of it all. So why are we talking about this? And there's a few reasons for it. One is just logistically, it makes it possible to work with structured data, which comes in handy when especially you are dealing with like data that comes from other places, and we'll get into that in a later week. But it also just lets you like group things together and then like pass that around as a single unit. So I could move some of this stuff into its own function, and maybe the parameter that I take is a single person, which kind of lets you structure your code. But even more, I don't know, more importantly than that, but like equally importantly, I guess, what this lets you do is structure your code or structure your data in a way that's closer to how you structure it like in your own brain. And this gets a little trippy, so I don't want to get too into it, but by that I mean, like, forget the computer for a second, forget that you're writing code for a second. Let's say that you have a task of keeping track of a bunch of data about a bunch of people, like, I don't know, a class full of people, for example, and you want to track their first name, their last name, their birthday, and their major. How would you do that? Like, forgetting the computer for a second. You're probably not going to get one stack of index cards and then write everybody's first name each on their own index card, and then like have that stack of index cards be your like first name stack, followed by doing the same thing for birthdays, where now you have a new stack of index cards with birthdays on it. And now to find out what someone's birthday is, you first have to find which index in the first stack of index cards they're in, and then go to your second stack of index cards and find the birthday. That's just not how you're going to do it, probably. If it is, let me know, because you're an interesting person. But that's not how most people's brains work, right? Most of us would probably write all of that data on a single index card, and we would say like each index card represents a single person. So you'd maybe like write name, Kevin, birthday, March 19, major, computer science, whatever. You would write all of that on a single index card, and then your stack of index cards, each index card would be a person. And so to find information about a person, you would go to that person's index card, and it would all be right there. And that is how objects work. And it's, again, a little abstract and a little bit philosophical, but one of the more important things that objects open up is structuring your data in a way that more closely resembles how you structure data in your own head, which in theory anyway makes it a little easier to write code now that you can, write a for loop that deals with each person instead of writing a for loop that gets a first name and then has to get a birthday from somewhere else and get the known for list from somewhere else. it's kind of all packaged together in a single unit, which in theory makes it easier to work with. Okay, that's as far as I'm going to go with that. The only other thing I'll say is that this is a known concept called object-oriented programming. So if you want more information, you can do a search for object-oriented programming, and you'll get a ton more information. This is a whole I don't know, pathway of studying. Like there's a whole field related to this kind of thing. So you can read all about it. But for now, I'll just say that like the important parts are, first of all, the syntax. It's curly braces and then fields separated by commas, where each field is a property name and then a value with a colon. And then the idea of like breaking your data down into like arrays and objects can contain arrays and all that nesting stuff that we talked about. And then the last thing is just kind of thinking more generally about how you structure your data in the sort of object-oriented way by breaking it down into these like cohesive units. Okay, I think that's as far as I'm going to go. So as always, of course, you know my speech. Please ask questions. Please let me know like what about this video didn't make sense. I would love to hear from you. But other than that, I'm going to say thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.